Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to another one of our Goalline training webinars. Today's topic is all about schedule management. I'll go over some of the assumptions we're making here, and I'll probably touch on kind of the requirements that need to be done before you get to certain parts as we go through today's webinar. A little bit of the usual housekeeping as we get started. You'll notice that you do not have any audio options throughout the webinar, but there is a chat. So if you do have any questions as we go, feel free to throw those questions into the chat and I'll take a look. And if I'm able to address it right away, or I know that we'll be addressing that later on in the webinar, we'll make sure to get your questions addressed there. We also have a great support team available to you for your day-to-day stuff. So if you ever do have any questions beyond what you see in our trainings here, you can reach out to our Goalline support team in various ways: email, live chat, and by phone. Phone and live chat is available Monday to Friday from 10 a.m. to 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. That is a bit of a change from previous years. We changed that a few months back where it used to be 8 a.m. Now it's 10 a.m., but still available until 8 p.m. Eastern on Monday to Friday. So without further ado, today is our scheduling management webinar. So I'm going to hop in. We're going to be using a variety of demo sites here. Really everything that we do is kind of on the back end when it comes to scheduling anyway, but we'll be showing the relationship kind of between what we see in certain areas and the public side of the site. I'll probably be using a lot of my officials demo site just because I like playing around in there more than other sites. But we're going to get started with talking about the different schedule details that you might need to set up for your schedules within your season. So we're going to head to the back end of a site. So if you're not familiar yet with Goalline, you're going to log into your site as an administrator in the upper right-hand corner. It doesn't matter what site layout you have. That login is always going to be in the upper right-hand corner, not to be confused with things like the registration account login or the officials login. So when I get logged in on my demo site to my backend, this is what I see as my control panel, and I can do a lot of my scheduling setup and season configuration from the master menu to apply it to all of the leagues and teams that I have in my Goalline site. There may be times where I want different schedule settings on different divisions based. I think a common example is going to be age group and skill level. Higher age groups maybe don't have the same length of a game as younger age groups. You may have individual statistics tracking for some skill levels, but not all skill levels. And so we're going to take a look at the different schedule details that you're able to set. And I'll try to give you a bit of a best practice as far as getting the most done with the least amount of tasks, because you can do a lot of things in bulk, but you do have some things that might have to be done on an individual league or an individual team basis. And just for the record as well, when I'm referring to teams, I'm referring to your association team. So whenever I say that something has to be done on a per team basis, I'm talking about once per rep team or once per group of rep teams if you happen to have multiple teams that play against each other, because they'll be sharing most of those details together. So I just want to make sure it doesn't sound too overwhelming to have to do an individual edit to a specific schedule. From the master menu, let's head to the schedule section of the menu. There's all kinds of things that we can do in here, but before we look at adding games and practices, let's look specifically at the season and schedule itself. I'm going to pop into managed seasons. We're not going to talk too much about managed seasons today, but the key here is to make sure that you have a season listed next to all of the divisions, which represent both your divisions and your rep teams, that there is a season here, that it is considered an active season. So you don't want to see the word none here. And you also don't want to see a season that is out of date. And I often recommend to everybody that even if you have a distinct group of leagues or teams that are going to be active in the summer, that are not the same ones that are going to be active in the winter, and vice versa, I do recommend that you provide the same season details to all of your organizations, especially when you're able to select something that is a full calendar year span. The date range that I select historically on my demo site here is August 1st to July 31st. And you can kind of see here that that's been the date range more or less since I started using this site a long, long time ago. And one of the reasons that I like that is, number one, consistency. And it's easy to know when when I come in to do this next year, what date range should I select? Probably the same one that's been used for the last 9 or 10 years. So that's one reason to make it consistent. The other reason is that when you don't have everybody doing the same season thing, then you kind of force yourself into doing this in an iterative kind of way, or perhaps you don't do this from the master menu at all, which is fine, and you let it happen at the league and team level, because there are permissions that can be granted that allow someone at the league or team level within those control panels, so navigating to one of these divisions, to only manage this for that one specific division. So that is possible. But when you do this from the master menu, we just want to make sure that the season is active, that it's current, and that it has a date range that we know is going to fit all the schedules that we're going to need. And those include preseason, balancing, tiering, regular season, finals, and playoffs. So you want to make sure that your date range starts before anybody hits the ice. If you're hockey, I'm in hockey mode now, sorry. Anybody hits the ice or hits the court or hits the field. And then you want to make sure that that end date is well after, or at least, one whole day after the very last game of your finals and playoffs and championships. Once you have the fact that your season is current, now we'll move on to the schedule part. The schedule needs to exist for everyone. Everyone has to have an active season and schedule. I've said that probably a million times over the past bunch of years. All leagues and teams must have an active season and schedule. If they don't have an active schedule, the Goalline platform is basically not going to think you're using them, and it's not going to allow you to do a certain amount of things like assigning players to teams. They do have to be set up with a season and schedule. It just needs to be a schedule name. I refer to it a lot as a placeholder schedule, because you're going to have a regular season schedule of games. You just don't necessarily have those games yet, but you do need the regular season schedule to be added. You can also add things like those other schedule names that I mentioned: exhibition schedules, preseason schedules, balancing schedules, whatever it is that makes sense that you need as part of your scheduling. Regular season, or sorry, the other reason to differentiate those is to make sure that you are not going to count games, results, standings, and stats into a set of standings that they don't apply to. So if the only schedule you create is regular season, but you have exhibition games that don't count towards regular season standings, you need to make sure that you're creating a new schedule for that. Otherwise, the games that you create in that regular season schedule, the Goalline platform is just going to lump them all together as part of the regular season. So keep that in mind. When you create your regular season schedule, you're going to select the standings option. If you don't see the standings option, that's fine. It just means that you have association teams only, and that playoffs and brackets are never going to apply to you. So it's just going to default itself to be that schedule type. And then you'll make sure that everyone has that schedule. Similar to the managed seasons look, we can see that there's an active season here. And then down the right-hand side, we can see all of our divisions or rep team division background titles. And it tells us whether or not there are any schedules. So I can see that in this season, I have a regular season and a showcase schedule here. I have regular season everywhere else. Doesn't look like I have much more than regular season. So I'm going to go ahead and add an exhibition schedule so that all of my leagues and teams are going to have a place right from the get-go to add exhibition games. So I'm just going to use the word exhibition. It's going to combine the season and the schedule name. So it's going to show up as 2022-23 exhibition. I can put the word schedule if I want, but I don't need to use the word schedule. I'm going to check all, because everyone on my site, I would like for them all to have a placeholder schedule that is called exhibition, so that they know that that's where they're going to put exhibition games. And when I say they, that could be anybody. You don't have to grant team level or league level access to this. This could all be done by one person for your entire association. But whoever is doing that scheduling needs to make sure that they're adding scheduled games to the correct schedule so that they show up in the correct set of standings, or not show up in the wrong set of standings. Now let's look at the details here. So the details of your schedule, there are a lot of them, and we're going to go through a bunch of them, and we might go through a few sections in different areas, because depending on your sport, there are going to be some differences. I'm using demo sites that are multi-sport, but if you're not multi-sport, the schedule details will just be the default sport that we have set up for you. So if you're baseball, you're going to see baseball terminology when it comes to your schedule details. If you are multi-sport, you're telling the system what sport your league is, and then from there, the system is going to be able to differentiate the terminology used for that schedule. And that gets into a little bit of those individual edits that might happen. So you may be doing this for all of your volleyball divisions at one time, and then do the same process again for all of your lacrosse divisions, and then again for all of your ringette divisions, et cetera, et cetera. So the first set of display settings are typically, they're going to be pretty much the same. No matter what type of sport you are. The very first setting says active. This schedule that I'm creating today should not be the active schedule. I want the regular season schedule to continue being the active schedule. I just want to add this as a placeholder. So I'm saying no to this. But if you were doing this and adding your regular season schedule, then keep that setting to yes, because it does need to be active. You can create a schedule that fits your season date range and still have it not be active, and that could still result in some issues with trying to get things scheduled in the system if you haven't set it to active yet. Whether or not you want it published is, again, that's entirely up to you, and you don't have to publish the schedule at all. So it can be active but not published, and you don't have to publish the standings for it either. In fact, for my exhibition schedule here, let's not have a standings, because exhibition standings really don't matter. The only thing I want exhibition for is to create games that will not impact my regular season schedule. The other questions here about tracking and publishing individual player statistics. This is one where, again, you may decide that your organization makes sense to do this kind of, we'll do this group of teams all at once because we're going to track stats for them. And then we'll do another group where we don't track stats. So this is just a simple yes or no. And again, based on your sport, this is going to determine whether or not you're going to track goals and assists and specific penalties, yellow cards, red cards for soccer, things like that. If you are not tracking individual stats and you only track the end score of the game, then you want to say no all the time. And this may be a resource issue from one season to the next, where you might want to have statistics, but if no one's tracking them and writing them down, you may not have anything to reference in order to track them. So every schedule can have its own setting on whether or not you are going to track individual player stats. If you are tracking them, you can choose whether or not you would like to display them. The system won't throw an error at you if you choose to say, no, we won't track them, but yes, we will display them. It's just going to display a statistics tab that will never really have anything more than games played in the statistics. So if you're not tracking them, I recommend saying no to displaying those statistics. Again, if you're tracking statistics, do you want to differentiate rookies, and how do you want to treat, if you're a hockey organization, you'll find a question here about goalies. And then there is this setting here that I have on my demo site. It may not exist on all sites by default, but if it's something that sounds useful to you, contact support and we can turn that feature on. This is whether or not I can share games here with my other schedules. If you do have distinctly different schedules within the same division or same league, that maybe some games count towards one league and some games don't, this is a setting that allows you to say this game is going to be played on our exhibition schedule, but it's actually going to count on the regular season schedule standings. So there are some advanced ways for you to kind of manipulate the way that you need things to operate for your organization and the way you have your teams grouped. A common example for when that might come into play is if you have some divisions that play and have an opportunity to attend like a provincial championship or a play down, whereas other teams in that same group maybe aren't eligible for that regardless of their standings. So there are times where that could come in pretty handy for you. Getting down into the points awarded, some of these points awarded are going to be determined by the sport that you have, because not every sport has a concept of a shootout or even overtime. But there are going to be settings here for regulation, overtime, shootout, and forfeit, wins and losses, and ties. Um, you don't have to use forfeits. You can turn those off entirely so that they're not an option when it comes to reporting a game. Most organizations do occasionally have to use the forfeit features. So if you ever do find yourself in that position, make sure that you have your point values in there appropriately. And this is pretty straightforward. It's going to be calculating the wins, losses, and ties for whatever period in which you've ended the game at the value that you've entered here. And then there's some things that we're going to relate to. We're going to come back to our tiebreaker after we've looked at some of these details, because these are all, the points are the first factor in your tiebreaker, of course. That's it's kind of a no-brainer that the points is what determines whether or not there is a tie. And then from there, there's different tie-breaking rules that are going to apply. Tiebreakers are also going to allow you to adjust the way your columns appear in the standings. And we'll take a more in-depth look at that. But when it comes to having things like overtime, wins, and losses, if there are values for winning in overtime, if it's different than a regulation win, which isn't super common, but what is very common is to have an overtime loss value. And when you do have overtime loss values, it is strongly recommended to configure that your tiebreaker shows standings that allows the overtime loss column to show in standings. I always recommend that whenever you've given something a point that otherwise maybe is going to be hard to calculate with mental math on the public side of the website, it's always good to show those columns out by themselves so that you can see that there were 2 regulation time wins and 1 overtime loss. And that's why we have 5 points instead of 4 points, because if I don't show that overtime loss column, it's just going to show in the loss column, and losses generally are not associated with any points. So that's just a tip to make sure that if you are using things like forfeits, shootouts, and overtime, that you include those columns as appropriate in your tiebreaker to make sure that there's not going to be any questions about how was this point value calculated and why did that tiebreaker do this and that sort of thing. So you'll put in all of your values here. There are additional point values that can be turned on. Again, this by default, I don't believe you're going to see. But if this does make sense to you, and there are some adult organizations that get kind of heavy into this, we do have the ability for you to have specific points per period win if you're doing hockey or ringette. There are some leagues that use that kind of scoring where you get 1 point per period, and that way, at the end of the game, your point value is not based strictly on whether or not you won or lost. It's based on the point values per periods. Fair play bonus points are another one that may or may not apply to you. And if they do, there's a couple of different ways that you can use them. So by default, it will be off, but it can be turned on for impacting standings, as in it will actually give points to the team given the fair play point, or it could just be a display value. So it won't actually impact the points column for the team, but the points that they earn through fair play would be displayed and displayed in a way that you can always, when you click on the column header, it will reorder the standings based on the fair play point values. When you're using either of these options, you're then going to select how it's going to work. So is it going to be a half point given if you get the fair play? Is it a full point, or is it a scale from 1 to 10? So when you're using the fair play points, this would show in your standings so that you can display who has the most fair play points in the season in that schedule. It becomes an extra item to report when you are reporting the game score. So when you're finishing reporting the game, you would indicate which team earned the fair play point. The mercy/fair play rule is exactly as it sounds. And what this just does, it doesn't cap the number of goals a player is going to be able to get credit for in any given game, but it does cap the number of goals the team is going to get credit for when it comes to things like tiebreakers for goals for and against, or most goals for. If you have this maximum, it's basically a maximum differential. If I have this set at 5, I can end a game with 5-0, and all 5 of those goals count. But if I end a game 6-0, then only 5 of those goals count. If it's 6-1, all 6 of those goals count because the differential is still 5. So as soon as the difference in goals exceeds the number you enter here, the goals that are in excess of that no longer count. As far as how you deal with that in your league, there's probably a setting a policy in your league rules that indicates if there is one, and it may be only at certain levels that it may apply. And it could be a fairly large number that maybe doesn't ever come into play, but having it here is going to ensure that a team will not get credit for more goals than they should based on your mercy rule setting. A shutout bonus point, again, is exactly as it sounds. Do you give one or not? And this does add a point to the standings. So if you don't add a point to standings based on having a shutout, so 0 goals scored against your team, then you want to keep that setting to no. Obviously, not all sports even have that applicable. So the next thing we see is game duration. And again, this is going to be different based on your sport. And it may be something where you need to decide to iterate on how you're going to put in your details. So mine here is a little messy just because of my my multi-sport here. I'm just going to click edit on my women's regular season schedule over here so we can see a little bit more accurately kind of what that looks like. So the number of periods in a game, if I'm hockey, this should be defaulted to 3. If you're soccer, it would say halves and default to 2. Other sports that are in quarters, it'll be 4, etc. So you can set this up as needed. And the general length of those periods is what you want to put in here. So if you have 3 15-minute periods, then we have 3 and 15 here. This is another one where we do have custom period lengths that you can enable. And again, recreational hockey, adult hockey, sometimes in ringette as well. There will be 2 15-minute periods followed by 1 5-minute period. And if that's the case, then we do have a feature to allow you to accurately report on that so that you'd be able to put in your first period is 15, second period is 15, third period is only 5 minutes. If that is a feature that makes sense to your organization, go ahead and reach out to support and we can make sure that feature gets turned on for you. It's just a quick little flick of the switch. If you do have overtime, you do need to indicate the number of overtime periods that you will go to before the system's going to assume you're probably going to end up with a shootout or you're going to let the tie stand. And you also want to include the number of minutes in those overtime periods. So if you do 3 5-minute overtimes, then you're going to say 3 5-minute periods of overtime. And then after that, either will assume the tie stands, or if you have a shootout win value, we'll assume that you're going to have a shootout and there will be an indication of who won in the shootout when you go to report that game. So your game duration is going to be based on your sport specific stuff. I'm going to find a volleyball one here just to, let me see here, men's. No, oh, maybe I don't have it on my screen right now. Yeah, I'm going to click back on my browser here for a sec and find, there's my volleyball league. So this is a volleyball schedule. So I just want to show the way that this is going to appear, because with volleyball and certain sports are like this, there are rules on how you can win. So in this case, teams must win by 22 points and they have to score at least 25 points. But you do have the ability to adjust this. So if you're doing a U10 league and maybe you only have to make it to 20 points instead of 25. You can set that up in there. And these are going to impact when you go to report those individual set scores. You're going to, it's going to continue adding those sets until you're able to actually allot that the game has been won by somebody. The allotted venue time in minutes, this is going to be present on all of your schedules as well. This is especially important if you are using the Goalline's advanced official system to assign referees or umpires to your games. I always think that it's an important setting anyway, because this setting here is going to help prevent conflicts. If I say that the time slot is 75 minutes and I create a game tonight at 6 o'clock, I cannot have another game at that same venue or for those same teams until 7:15. If I try to schedule something there at 7 o'clock, it's going to result in a schedule conflict because the last game shouldn't be over yet for another 15 minutes. when it comes to the officials and umpires, referees, and stuff that are being assigned, it's important to not to ensure that they won't be double booked and assigned to a game at 6 and then another game somewhere else, or at the adjacent field at 7 o'clock. It's not going to allow them to be assigned to anything else until the 7:15 time slot, and even then, the back to back would only be if the venue is in the same location. So that's a really important setting to keep in mind there. Once you have all of your settings in here in general, when you go to create your schedule, you are able to set those values as default. So all your point values and your, the period lengths and things like that are all going to be set as default values next time you come in to create a schedule. The only thing that you will always have to reset is your date range. And this is to make sure that the dates of your schedule are, first of all, within your season date range. And second of all, you want to make sure that they are not before and not after. They need to be finished. So if my regular season can't start until after my tiering schedule has finished, then I want to make sure that I select a start date of this schedule that won't conflict with that. And I also want to make sure that it ends before we know that the finals and provincials or playoffs have to be completed. So those are the main settings on your schedule details. And I'll just click back on my browser here again, because we've got all kinds of schedule examples here on my site that are all multi-sport here. Let me see here. So I've got a basketball one. We'll just take a quick peek at basketball, because one of the differences with basketball and your point values and individual stats tracking is whether or not they are going to be tracking just the points people scored or full individual statistics. And so we're talking rebounds, we're talking 3-point attempts versus made shots and all of that stuff. So if all you're doing is tracking the score and who scored the points, then you do want to track individual stats and say that, yeah, I just want to do points. If you're not tracking individual stats at all, you'll just say no and you'll enter the final score. Similarly, down here, when it comes to the game durations and stuff, we have the same idea here. So we would have 4 quarters, and let's say they're 15 minutes long. So you would have whatever details are appropriate for your sport there. All right. So now that we've looked at the schedule details, let's think about tiebreakers. So Goalline's default tiebreaker, I'm just going to bring it up. There is a help article in the FAQ, which is located just at faq.goalline.ca. That you are able to check out anytime. I'm just going to see here our default tiebreakers. There it is. Sorry about that. I just wanted to make sure that I was reading it correctly. Instead, I didn't want to give you any false information. So points obviously is the first one. You're not tied unless you're tied for points. Then the Goalline platform is going to say, if you're tied for points, whoever has the least games played wins that tiebreaker. If you're still tied, it's going to take the total number of wins for both of those tied teams. If you're still tied, it's going to go for total goals for and then total goals against. So those are the default tiebreakers. After that, if those teams are still tied, Goalline's going to do what we call the coin flip. And it's an algorithm that the Goalline platform is going to do behind the scenes that's just going to decide the winner between those teams. There are custom tiebreaker tools that can allow you to change the way that your tiebreakers are going to work. So I'm going to hop in over here. It's going to be found in the schedule section. And in schedule settings. So manage tiebreakers is where we're going to go. I'm going to click and I can either edit or add a new tiebreaker. When I look at my tiebreaker, because I have multi-sport, I can select what sport is it for. But if I don't have multi-sport, the sport is just going to be defaulted to yours. So when you give your tiebreaker a title, I always recommend that you give it a title that is kind of sport or season specific or division specific, because you may have some divisions where you have different overtime rules than in other ones. And so there may be different reasons to have different tiebreakers and the different columns in your standings. So we can call this tiebreaker whatever we want. So I'm going to call this the OT loss tiebreaker. So that I can make sure that it's going to display overtime losses in my standings column. When I look at the steps here, there's a drop down of a bunch of different steps. You're going to find that the word points is not in the steps for the tiebreakers because that's the first one. You're not tied unless you're tied for points. So obviously at this point, we're taking tie breaking steps. So you're going to go and select your own tiebreaker. So our default is going to be the most wins. And then you can choose things like most wins against tied teams. So it's only going to consider the most wins for the teams that are tied. And then there's an option where you can do the same thing if it's only two teams, because when we say against tied teams, there could be more than one team tied for that same position in the standings. So you've got all kinds of different tiebreaker options in here. A lot of them are going to line up very, very well with your competition rules as far as how you do that. Most points overall, least penalty minutes, earliest penalty, earliest goal. Obviously, in order to use some of these tie-breaking layers, you absolutely must be tracking individual player statistics, because I can set up a tiebreaker that uses least penalty minutes and earliest goal, but there's never going to be a way for the system to know that unless I'm tracking individual statistics. So when I go to report those games, I'm going to be entering who got penalties and when, who got goals and when, and that will allow the tiebreaker to be used. So there's lots of different layers, and you can add up to 10 separate steps into the tiebreaker. As you're adding those, what you'll find is you can also set it up differently when it's just two teams. So if you want it to be an overall tiebreaker, a multi-team tiebreaker, to do it this way, but when it's two teams, you want to do it this way, you can check this box to add that second layer. You can also choose to reset the steps on a partially broken tie. So what this means is if we have three teams that are tied and they get down, I'll just go back to the tiebreakers here, and we get down to total goals 4, and now there's only two teams left that are still tied together. Without checking that box, it's just going to go to the next one and try to break the tie between the remaining two teams. But if you check that box, it will start right back up at the top and say, okay, now between just these two teams, since I've already broken the tie with the third team, we can continue resetting it. And it could be 5 or 6 teams, and it will just continually go through the layers of the tiebreaker until all of the ties have been broken. So you're able to set that up to say that reset these steps when it's partially broken. You can also check a box that says this is my default tiebreaker. After you've set this and created your tiebreaker, every time you create a schedule, and so go into manage schedules, when you go to create a schedule, it is automatically going to select this new tiebreaker to be the default. I will point out that it will not override the current tiebreaker on any already existing schedule. So if I'm creating this today and I want to apply it to my schedule that I created last week, I do need to go and edit the schedule details to change the tiebreaker that's going to be used. So now let's take a look at the columns and the standings. I mentioned this. These are a little small to see. So I'm going to expand my screen a little bit here, grow that a little. So what we see here is the ability to select that, yes, I want to show this. And yes, I want this to be what's highlighted. Only one of your items can be highlighted in your standings. Generally, it's going to be the points column. So yes, we want to show points. And normally this is the one that's going to be highlighted. The reason points is typically the one that's highlighted is because that's the one that's going to determine whether or not you are tied. But you could choose for any of your other columns to be the highlighted column. For example, if you are really a fan of the streak, you can have the streak be what's highlighted instead. But only one of these can be highlighted. And I can only select something to be highlighted if I've checked the box to actually show it in my standings. So there are, I think, no, I guess there's no legend here, but there is a legend available in the, oops, sorry, I clicked the wrong thing, in the tiebreaker. Yeah, so we've got a little video here, a video tutorial that does explain what all of these columns are. They're pretty self-explanatory, especially if you know your own sport fairly well. I know there's some sports that I've had to get to know over the years that I didn't know what they all meant, but now I think we're good. So we've got our games played and our wins, overtime win, shootout win, and then forfeit win. So if you don't have a different point value for wins, no matter what kind of win it was, you can just display the wins column. You don't have to display these separately. If you display them separately, it will say regulation wins 2, overtime wins 1, forfeit win 1, as opposed to regular, like your wins column just having 4 wins in it. Now, when we get into the loss side of things, I might want loss and overtime and shootout loss to be shown in here separately. Forfeit loss is something where if this is a really common occurrence in your league, maybe you want to show that as well. But the loss, overtime loss, and shootout loss typically are going to want to be listed separately, because when you have those listed separately, they are going to separate themselves out to a regulation loss that has no points associated with it versus a overtime or a shootout loss that may have a point associated with it. Your ties column, again, if you do allow ties to stand and there's potential for there to be ties, show that column. If there's no potential for ties in your sport or in your division, you don't have to show that column. Forfeit losses, again, because forfeit losses may matter in some way, shape, or form. You can show that column. Your games back is similar to kind of the streak, where it's a little bit sport specific, but it's going to show in that column as you start having games scheduled and reported, and the point values based on your wins for how many games away are they from the leaders. Your win percentage and conference win percentage. Win percentage is exactly what it sounds like. Conference win percentage would only be shown or will only be relevant if you have conferences within your leagues themselves. Your fair play points, if you do fair play points that impact your standings, I strongly encourage you to show this in the standings. Your total points and fair play points together would be the total over here. Points for, points against, difference, and your last 10 streak is also available to display in here. You'll notice that I did it earlier without saying it, but I grabbed one of these to drag it and move it because I would like for it to be games played, wins, ties, then my losses before we move on and see the other things. So if I want things to be in a different order, I can move things all around and move the order of everything that I want to have in here. So once I'm done with a tiebreaker, I didn't really give it any steps here. So we'll say most wins, most points for, least points against, and let's see, least games played, and most fair play points. Why not? Okay, so I'm going to create my tiebreaker here. All right. So now that I have a tiebreaker, I am able to go and apply it to any schedule that I create. I did check the box to make that the default tiebreaker. So when I go and create a schedule, I thought I did. It will create that as my OTL tiebreaker. So when I create a schedule here, it's going to create that as a tiebreaker. I'm going to call this preseason because Trevor's site already has a schedule like this. So I'm just going to go here, 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 and here. And I'm good with all of that. So I do need to enter my schedule date range here. I just want a short little schedule. I don't want anything too long because it's just preseason. So now I'm going to create that schedule, and that is going to be what we see when we're looking at those groups and looking at the preseason schedule. So if I go and look at the public side of our site here, if I'm selecting the, let's see here, divisions. Oh, I haven't. I'm going to have to add somebody to it, so we'll come back and look at that in a bit here and make sure that we see the tiebreakers kind of in action. And looking over at my other demo site over here, if I select my hockey divisions and go into my Women's Hurricane Inlet League, we can see the standings the way that I've got them configured. So I've got my points column kind of in the middle here. I do have forfeit wins and losses showing, just wins, no regular losses. So this is probably not the best set of standings to show, because I'm not showing any regulation style losses, and games played is here, but nothing else. So that is just one example here. If I look back at historical seasons, we can see that there's different point values because I use different tiebreakers in different seasons here. So this is a little bit more of kind of how I would expect to see things like that. So forfeit wins are a separate column, losses are all by themselves, shootout loss by itself, forfeit loss over here, goals for and against. So you're able to look at your standings with whatever columns you deem fit for your specific sport. All right, so that is how we set up the schedule details that we need and how to update your tiebreaker. So your tiebreaker is part of your schedule details, and as soon as you apply it, as soon as you start adding things to your schedule, it's going to create that specific tiebreaker over there for you. So let's actually go ahead and look at importing a schedule. So there's a couple of different ways to get the actual schedule into your system. If you're using Goalline and you're the league and you schedule the whole season for all of the teams, you can generate your schedule from your league specific control panel, or you can upload a schedule file. If you work it out on a spreadsheet, you can save that spreadsheet as a CSV formatted file so that you can just upload it into Goalline. We have a schedule upload, a bit of a wizard that you can follow. There's some sample spreadsheets as well. So in my schedule section down here, if I find upload schedule file here, there are 3 formats available as a template. I strongly encourage you to use the template that uses year, month, day, the international date format, just because you never know if different people working on a schedule might be confused or using a different version of month, day, or day, month. I find the year, month, day, number one, is a little bit better for consistency. And secondly, CSV formatted files tend to like it more, and it tends to be less problematic when you go to upload. When you go to upload, you're just going to browse your computer for, oh yeah, maybe you should browse your computer first and then click the upload button. So you can browse your computer, locate a schedule upload file. I've got so many sample upload. That's what I want to see. Oh, so we'll upload our sample upload here, and I'm going to upload that. When you go to upload a schedule file, you're going to see kind of 2 basic sections. The top section are the system fields that you want to match your file's fields to. The bottom part is your file. The dark highlighted row is the first row of your file. So sometimes people will avoid or not have the header column that has the labels of the columns. If that's the case, then you want to just say that, yes, I do want to import that top row, because it will always be highlighted, even if it said Blizzard versus Thunder over here. I would want to make sure that I'm importing it. In this case, because it is a title row, I don't actually want to import it because it's not game information. What I do here is I go through the matching steps to make sure that the column in my file is matched to something from the system. So I'm going to come up here and select home team for home team, visitor team, start date. Very specific, minute comment here is that your start date, your column header might say this, but the actual start date might be in a different format. So pay attention to that, just in case you saved the file with a different format. If you did, you're going to have the other formats available to select. Your start time, Your duration, either a duration or an end time is required. So either an end time, just like the start time would be formatted the same way, or duration in minutes, but not both. Details and showing details. These are great examples where if you don't actually have any details typed into your file to show off on the schedule, you don't have to show them at all, and you don't even have to match those columns. You can disregard that column entirely. The league name, when you do this from the master menu, is absolutely required. If you do it from your league specific menu, you're going to find that you can just disregard this column because it will already know which league you are. Practice type, schedule name, and venue, all required. So the venue is absolutely required. And you're going to see a sampling of your information in the bottom part here. So we've got all of our columns there matched. I'm going to say no to the highlighted row because it's just a title, and we hit continue. The first thing it's going to do is go through a quick check just to make sure that the data is valid. So it's going to show all of the rows of my file, not just a sampling like we saw on the previous screen. If there was anything wrong with the file, it would show what was wrong with it, and it would be highlighted in red. So I wouldn't be able to proceed without fixing what's wrong with those particular columns. So I'm going to continue here. I'm going to have to make some weird selections because I'm uploading a sample sheet. But just for fun, we're going to go through this. And note that when you do use an exact match for the words in your system versus the words in your file, and by that I mean things like using U16 space capital B for boys, capital H for house. If I put my league name in there exactly like this, it would automatically match it for me to that league name in the system. But I always get a chance to verify it and make sure that it's correct. So I'm going to say GU18 rep here. Let's go ahead with, well, I'm just going to, like I said, make these up a little bit as I go. Halifax girls. No, let's do Halifax girls house league and Halifax boys house. And now that I've done that, I continue. It's going to ask me, are you sure? I'm going to say yes, even though that doesn't really match up with what my league names are called on these demo sites. And now I see a team match. So this is the same thing as the league match, only now we're saying you said that there were teams in this division, match them. And then you said there were teams in this division, match them. Again, anytime the names are exact, it's going to match that up automatically. So I am just going to kind of randomly select some of these because I didn't, I'm uploading this to the wrong. Let's see. It's Newfoundland. All right. Oh, I got BC twice. So let's go with Quebec. All right. All right. So there's that one. There's that one. And Bedford, Beachville. I like to note that when you do use team names that like your file might have sometimes nicknames in it, it's okay to use nicknames in your file so that you're able to, yeah, because you're always able to match these up. I'm matching a couple of them twice here again, just because I'm using the wrong demo site here. So yep, we're okay with this. Might end up with some scheduling conflicts. Involves a rep team. Okay, so I chose some random selections here that didn't actually didn't work. So let's go ahead and say that over here. These are house rep. Okay, I think that might be all right. Should have done this on the right site, that's for sure. Okay, let's pretend that this is going to continue to work. So the only thing we would have to still match is doing the same process in the file. I have the venue names, and I've got those in there kind of the same way. So when you have your venue names listed, they are all going to be available for you to match. And when you match them, as I said earlier, if it's an exact match to what's in the system, you can go ahead and match them. But you can see here, you can use things like nicknames in your file, and you can change the way that you have them written. So here I have CHP S1, but I could also write Scotia One, or whatever makes sense to me with the venues that I use. So if you use kind of nicknames and codes, but in your system you have them full out, it's not going to prevent you from being able to upload. Another thing to note is that the order of your columns here doesn't matter at all either. So if you start with creating a spreadsheet that your association uses to create your league schedules, you can just take that spreadsheet, and as long as it's got the required columns and it's saved as a CSV file, you're going to be able to upload it into Goalline. If you ever do have any issues, our Goalline support team can take the file. If you send it in via email there, we can take a look at it and make sure that everything looks correct. So that's how we add schedules through the uploader. The other option, of course, is to add games and practices one at a time. Add, edit, delete games is something you're going to find at the master menu and at the league and at the team level. From the master menu, it's going to ask me, what league am I doing this for? So I'm going to use the drop down to select who it is I want to add a game for. So I want my U18 girls house. And actually boys house. Let's do U18 boys house, select a schedule because I have more than one schedule to choose from. So I want to create a preseason game. And so I'm going to select that. So I'm going to be adding a game to boys house U18 to the preseason schedule. And I use the drop down here to select whatever teams happen to be available to me. So right now I just have Bedford Bears. So I'm going to make the game against TBA. TBA is a built-in stand-in for teams that you don't have a game, or games that you don't have a team for both of the home and visiting. It is very important not to create your own team called TBA. If you create a team called TBA, the Goalline system is going to think they're a normal team, and it's going to conflict check all the time when you use it. Using the Goalline already provided TBA option here is going to make it so that it will not go through conflict checking for this team. It will always go through conflict checking for the venue and for whatever actual team is in use. So I'm going to say that's against TBA. We'll set this game up for this coming Saturday. It's going to be at noon instead of 7 o'clock. And because it's exhibition, we're going to have extra long periods, and we're going to do a 90-minute time slot. So I'm going to go ahead and create that game. I can email out that game if I want to email details about it, but I'm just going to go ahead and create that game over here. And let's see if that's added to our schedule yet. There we go. So we can see now we've got a preseason game on our schedule. It's the Bedford Bears against TBA. We don't know who they're going to play yet, but we know where and we know when. Now going to our standings here because, we're going to have to report a game. So we'll get there in just a moment here. Now that I have a game created, I can edit this game and just do whatever it is that I might need to do. The one thing that I will point out is, because every sport's a little bit different, if your sport is an outdoor sport, when you edit the game, you will have an option here that says rain out. And so when you're using the rain out option, your game becomes as if it was canceled and set to be rescheduled, but it will not be removed from the schedule. If you are using the officials platform, you're going to find that canceled, to be rescheduled, or rained out will automatically notify the officials and your assigner in chief to make sure that they're all aware that the game has been canceled. So in case people forget to tell the referees, the system's going to do it for you so long as you set that status. You'll also find that you actually can't delete a game if there are officials assigned to it, which is an added little safeguard there for you that your official in chief will appreciate. I'm going to go into a league menu here, and we'll just take a quick peek at what it looks like from the league menu, because it's going to be almost identical. The difference is, as I said, when I click add, edit, delete games, I'm adding a game to this division in this schedule. If I want to add a preseason game, I go to the preseason schedule. If I want to add an exhibition game, I go to the exhibition schedule. The current active schedule, when you click standings from my public site, is going to go to the regular season schedule tools. So here it's automatically going to try and show us standings for regular season because that is the active schedule when we click on standings. If I click to add, edit, delete games, I just don't have to make that selection of what division is it that I'm creating this for and what schedule is it for, because we already know that information. Getting down a little further, if I go and look at a rep team, so a team where I only manage their schedule for the games we have, our home and away games, but I don't care about any of the other games, I do the exact same thing. When I hit add, edit, delete games for whatever schedule it is, I can create a game. It does have to include my team because I can't create games between the opposing teams that don't belong to my association. So that's how to add games. Now that we've added some games, I am just going to go. I'm going to report a game there into our. Which one was it? I forget where we were. Boys' house. Okay. Or is it girls' house? We've got some options here. Okay, so we've got some teams in here, so I can actually create a game. So I'm just going to create a game that I can go ahead and report right away. So this is in our U18 house. So let's find that one over here. Girls U18 house. We've got a schedule where we just created this game. Now I want to go to the statistics tab. So when I'm reporting a game, I want to go to the statistics tab and I want to report a game score for whatever schedule that game belongs to, the same way as I add it to the schedule based on who it belongs to. So this game was added to the regular season schedule. So I'm going to click here. It's going to automatically show me a few games from the past few days and a couple of days into the future. So here is our game. And now I click report. Based on my schedule details, I'm either going to be tracking individual player statistics or I'm going to be just entering the score. So because we have it set to track individual statistics, I need a roster and I don't have a roster here right now. That may be something where if you don't track the details, then you might need to set that you're not tracking individual stats. So I'm going to go and change that setting so that I'm not displaying individual stats, or not tracking individual stats. Just going to hit enter up here to save that change. And then head over, and then we'll go ahead and report that game again with just the final score. So now that I click report here again, it's only asking me for the score now because I'm not tracking individual stats. So this is going to be 5-3. The game did not end in overtime. Locking the game to prevent further changes is something that a coordinator with league level or master menu permissions can do. If you are a team level administrator reporting a game score for your team, you likely will not see this option and you can't edit a game that has been reported and locked. So we'll submit our game report, and now we've finished reporting a game. And we'll head back out and take a look at that now that we've got it here. So instead of just being a game on the schedule, we can actually see the score was 5-3. We can look at the results tab over here and see that there is a game result here. I don't have any additional details to click into to view because there are no individual stats. The only detail we have is the score, but we now have that there. And then if I click on standings, it's going to show these two teams with their one game played. We have a win here and a loss here. Our points for are listed right here. So nice and easy to see how that relationship is going to be between your schedule tools and the public side there. The last thing I'll pop into is just a quick little look at practices. Scheduling practices can be done through the upload as well. It doesn't have to be games in that upload, but one at a time. They can be done add, edit, delete practice, and you can either edit or add a new practice. Because I'm in a league menu, I only see the teams that belong to this league. If I was in a team menu, I only have that one team, so I don't have to pick a team. And then further from the master menu, I would have every single one of my teams available to select. So you're going to pick your venue, pick your team, pick your type, your date and time. So we'll just make this a little half-hour practice. That's full ice at the Bedford rink. And the other option that I have is to create a recurring practice. I can set a recurring practice that's every week until the end of December, and it will create multiple practices when I hit enter. The fun thing about being able to, they've got a schedule conflict, so they're not able to do that. They have a game conflict, so we're going to go ahead and change our detail here just to get around that. I don't think they're going to have any game conflicts on Wednesday, so let's, oh, nope. You know what it is? I'm using that venue. So let's go ahead and put that at a different venue. Let's put it at the Halifax Forum. So this is a great example of all the conflict checking that it's going to do, because it will not let you create a schedule that's going to be in conflict with any other schedule items that you already have, which is great. So we can see here's all those practices that just got added because we added one every week until the end of December. The fun thing is now I can edit one of these practices and say they don't want this November 30th practice anymore, but they still want all of their other practices. I can take away the recurring practice option and make a change here to either change the date or the time so that we can accommodate it, or I can delete just one specific practice at a time. The other option that I have available is that it can be offered to another team within my association, in which case all our teams would receive a notification that there's practice time available, and first come, first serve, they'd be able to claim my practice time. That way you don't have to give it up from your association. You can keep it within the association for another team that can take advantage of it. So that is our scheduling webinar today. So we took a look at all of the different schedule details that can impact your schedule, and took a look at how that's going to impact the way that you report games, the way that you're able to show things in your standings, how to manage your tiebreakers to again impact your standings columns and make sure that your tiebreaker is going to comply with your competition rules, how to import and update schedules for both games and practices. So today's webinar will be available on our YouTube channel shortly. If you're watching this at home with a coffee later on, or whether you're watching it live, thank you so much for taking your time today to check it out. We'll have another webinar coming up in another couple of weeks that you should receive an invitation to next week. Any suggestions on webinar topics that you specifically would love to see us do, please feel free to contact our support team and provide those suggestions so that we can make sure that our trainings are always going to be beneficial for you. Thanks so much. Thanks for joining.